Good afternoon. We did show great talent in dining efficiency. Jim, we challenged this group to get in and out of here in 40 minutes and get fed, so they were eager to get back here and listen to your remarks. It's a great privilege and pleasure for me to introduce our next speaker, who I know everyone in this room knows, Jim Messina. Jim is the Deputy Chief of Staff to the President. He is a veteran of politics and public policy in America. Prior to serving as the Chief of Staff for the President, he was the Chief of Staff for the presidential campaign. Before that, he had a number of jobs in government and public service, including most recently he was Chief of Staff to Senator Baucus, and before that, Chief of Staff to Byron Dorgan. Jim comes to these issues from his head, but also from his heart. As a Montanan, he has done an enormous amount to protect the beautiful, great outdoors in his state. He is deeply concerned about the energy policies and climate change agenda for this country, and will be deeply involved in this issue as it moves forward. It's a great privilege and pleasure for me to introduce Jim Messina, the President's Deputy Chief of Staff.
Thank you all for coming. Everyone hear me? I'm kind of a quiet talker. All right, so I have the best job in American politics. And one of the great pieces of my job is every once in a while you get to do something cool. And this summer, I was able to take the President of the United States fishing in Montana, where I'm from. And I thought, during the campaign, he came out 4 times to Montana. And I kept saying to him, look, the treasured landscapes and why we all do this are part of why I'm in politics and part of why I love politics and love getting things done. And I wanted to show him how important it was to preserve the lands that we all come from, that we all love. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I called the best fishing guide in America and said, can you take my friend fishing? And he said, sure, who's your friend? And I said, well, I can't really tell you, but tomorrow the Secret Service is coming to your house. And he's like, oh my goodness, is this for real? And I said, yes, it is. And unfortunately, as I was looking today at who was coming, the President's fishing guide is here. And Dan, I'm now about to make fun of you. So the President arrives in Montana, and of course it's August in Montana, and so it's beautiful, except for the one day the President of the United States picked. And so it was raining so hard you couldn't see across the river. And the guys at the event said, well, we can't take him fishing, right? And I said, it's Montana. We fish. Fishermen fish. Let's go. And the President was like, we're going fishing. So we get in there, and he's in the middle of the river, and like everything else, the President looks just perfect. And he's got the gorgeous cast. He's never fly fished before. And he's fishing better than I had ever fished in my entire life. Except, Dan, that the President doesn't catch a fish. And I do. And I'm just killing it, right? And at one point, the Secret Service guy looks at me and says, is this a good idea that you keep catching more fish? And the President hooks a couple really nice fish and almost gets them in. And there's a picture in the West Wing if you go across the street with the President and Dan fishing. And it's obvious the President has a fish on in the picture. And so I said, after an hour and a half, it is just pouring rain. I said, Mr. President, if you want to go in, we could go in now. And he looks at me and says, no way, this is the best part of my week. And fish for another hour. And at the end, we get into his car, and he looks at me and says, now I understand why you live here. Now I understand where you're from. And that is a piece of why we all do what you all do, and a piece of why we must pass comprehensive energy independence and climate change legislation as soon as we can. This is why this President is committed to it. It is very important, and it's a piece of what we're all doing. It's really one of the 3 things as I think about it. The first is the stimulus bill we passed, which, as you all probably heard earlier, is the single largest piece of investment in renewable energy in American history. The second is the amazing administrative work the Secretary Salazar and DOI are doing every single day We have had so many great successes in the first 9 months. We haven't been able to tell each one of them. And the amazing work that this administration is doing on renewables is continuing every single day. But the third piece is passing comprehensive climate change legislation. We have to get this done. First of all, because it'll create over 1 million jobs. And second of all, as the president said in New Orleans, and as I say to people all the time, when exactly has America succeeded by not leading? I mean, we're either going to lead or we're going to follow. And it's time for this country to lead. And if we pass this comprehensive piece of legislation, America will be a leader again, create jobs, preserve important pieces of our heritage and of our landscape, and grow this economy. Right now everyone knows that this is the most difficult economy in 60 years and 2 wars, and it's very hard to get the amazing challenges this president has in front of him. But one of the best things we could do for this economy is passing comprehensive climate change legislation. And this president is absolutely committed to doing that. You all know that right now we are struggling, and I work about half of my day on health care. I believe we're going to be victorious on health care. And after we win health care, we're going to look at this piece of legislation and say we need to move forward and get this thing done. This week, as you all know, the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, a committee that I used to work for a long time, is moving and is going to pass a piece of legislation that will be another gigantic step. The House of Representatives passed a piece of legislation that I think is very good. You all saw last week Senator Graham and Senator Kerry did an op-ed that gave us real momentum. The U.S. Conference of Mayors just had their 1,000th signatory to the Mayor's Climate Change Protection Agreement, a Republican from Arizona, which is a big piece of the momentum that we all talk about. And so thanks for all the work you're doing. We can get this done. But look, as the president said yesterday when I was with him in New Jersey, change is really hard. The status quo will always have a bunch of people who want to maintain it. And it takes the grassroots. It takes each one of you saying to everyone, your neighbors, here's why this is important. Here's why we got to get this done. Don't believe the hype from this other side. Here's what it's going to do for you. Here's what it's going to do for your community. Here's what it's going to do for this country. We have a tough responsibility, which is saying to everyone here's why we have to do this. These are conversations that have to occur person to person. The president's going to do what he's going to do. We are on the road, talking about this. We're doing about an event every week or two, I think it's fair to say. I'm talking about this with the president. The secretary and David and Strickland are on the road all the time talking about these things. The Green Cabinet is meeting today. We are moving forward with as much as we can do, but it takes all of you. And so part of what today is having you guys hear us babble. And part of what it also here is you guys giving us advice about what we need to do. And I heard it was a good discussion this morning. We're going to have a good discussion this afternoon. So I wanted to thank you and promise you that this White House and this administration and this president are absolutely committed to getting this done. It is a hallmark of what he believes is important to do for this country and this world, and is one of the single things that I think when you look back will be one of the most proud things we all work on together. And will truly go a long way in changing this country and this world. So thanks for what you're doing, and I look forward to seeing you all out there talking about this and when the president comes around the country. Thanks.
Have to make it quick, but how about 1 or 2 questions for Jim? Anybody have a question in the audience? Right here, sir.
Hi, my name is Brendan Bob. How will this go to Copenhagen? All these changes that we talked about today, what is going to be the defining thing that's represented in Copenhagen?
Well, not to by answering your question, I could get in trouble. No, I'm kidding. No, look, we are in discussions every day about that. I think you'll see us with more, be a little bit more forward-leaning as we get closer. I can tell you, though, that that is an important conference, and it goes back to what I said earlier. This country is either going to lead or follow, and I think you'll see us lead.
The last question right here, sir.
Terry Williams from the Tulalip Tribes. The president is meeting with tribal chairmen in a couple of days. And one of the questions is, will the tribes be able to go to Copenhagen? Can we go as part of the delegation and be a part of protecting our rights and resources? Because I don't know if you can give me an answer, but I wanted to let you know that that's coming up.
This is where I'm going to bucket this trickle.
Yeah. Okay, along with some of the other questions we had this morning, let us get back to you on that. And I don't have the answer to that at my fingertips. But we're glad one of the most valuable things we get out of these forums is that kind of question and that kind of input. So we will be back to you with a question on that. Jim's going to have to run. He's got a tight schedule. Thanks once again, Jim, for joining us. We appreciate it. So we are, rather than spend much more time hearing from Department of Interior representatives, what we're going to do is have the bulk of the remaining time this afternoon be follow-up questions and dialogue. But we didn't have a chance this morning to hear from John Jarvis, our new Director of the Park Service, or Christopher Mansour, our Head of Legislative Affairs. So I'm going to ask each of them to take literally 2 to 3 minutes and just offer a few thoughts from their perspective, and then we're just going to spend the rest of the whatever we have, half an hour, 45 minutes in a continued dialogue where we won't have the 20-second limit on question length.
Well, thanks, Tom. I'll make it quick. Several years ago, I was at a conference of scientists, and one of the scientists said that the historic range of variability is no longer a viable management paradigm. And then a couple weeks ago, I was at a meeting of World Protected Area leaders, and David Mabunda, who is the director of South Africa's National Parks, Kruger as one, said that a villager complained to him that the elephant came out of the park and ate his house. These two folks are saying the same thing, but one communicates it a little more down to earth and a little more realistically. I think the national park system, of which I have the responsibility along with 20,000 employees, has a unique role in this issue of climate change and creating a clean energy future. And that role is to lead by example and use these venues of the national parks as a place that we can provide public education, both about the effects of climate change and about how to incorporate sustainability into their own lives. In many of our parks in the system, the vast majority of our visitors are repeats. For instance, Mount Rainier National Park, where I was the superintendent, 60% of the visitation is repeat. Those are teachable moments when people come back to those parks and they ask the question like, what happened to the ice caves? At that moment, you have an opportunity to talk about climate change that makes it real to that individual. And then by demonstrating the very best in sustainability in our own facilities and our own operations, we can use those again to teach the public how this issue really can be addressed. For instance, we now have 3 LEED certified platinum facilities in the national parks. Most recently, we opened the Visitor Center at Lassen Volcanic National Park. And when you enter that building, you can learn about the geology and the volcanology of that feature, and you can also learn about the geothermal heating system in the floor. So we look forward to working with the Secretary and all of you and all these great members of the Department of Interior and taking this issue on. Thank you.
Good afternoon. When we first started planning this, they said I had 15 minutes to describe the entire legislative process to everyone here. That got cut down to 7 minutes, then 5, and I'm down to about 2. So this is going to be very, very quick. You all mostly know where we're at with the bill. The House passed it out by 1 vote over a majority. Senator Bingham's Energy Committee got it out with their version of an energy bill with a pretty good bipartisan majority. Right now we're looking at what's going to go on with the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. And I think that there tends to be, particularly in Washington, people look at, who's up, who's down, which way this process is going. And we get pretty focused on the trees of, what's going to happen tomorrow in the Energy and Environment and Public Works Committee, these kind of things. I think it's important on a process as complicated and as broad-ranging as energy and climate change is we really stay focused on the forest, both literally and figuratively. But more importantly, to really maintain a focus on the process itself. Are we moving forward? And so far, in this less than a year, this administration, this Congress has been able to move forward on amazingly complex and comprehensive energy and climate change legislation. And while that the process may not look really great from the outside, and it may look like the wheels are turning, this is warp speed for Washington, D.C. And you heard from Jim Messina just a little while ago, the important thing to move a bill this complicated forward, you need political will. And you heard that from Jim just now, that this is where the president is. He's got a congressional leadership that is completely behind what he's trying to do on energy and climate change. And he's got the cabinet working together in a cohesive format to help move the whole process forward. And so I think that as we move one step at a time, you'll see that this bill is going to move forward. There's still, after EPW, there's several other Senate committees that have got to move forward with it as well. And after that, it's going to, the Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid, will put it together in a package that he'll bring to the Senate floor. So there's a lot of steps left in this process, and it's easy to get focused on one or two, and the press always wants to see who's up, who's down, which way is this senator going, which way is that senator going. The whole thing, particularly in the Senate, as our secretary knows, it's a dance that slowly comes together. It's an interesting process, but eventually we get there. There's a couple of things that help move this process along. One is the political will that you just saw that Jim Messina talked about today. The other thing is that there's a series of carrots and sticks out there to help move this along. The sticks, the big one, is EPA's ability to regulate greenhouse gases. And I don't think anybody out there really wants us to do it from a standpoint of just a regulation by a particular agency. So there's a lot of movement, a lot of force from people to say, let's do this through legislation. The carrots are also pretty obvious, and they came out in the Carrie Graham editorial that came out not too long ago that Jim also mentioned, where you can see the basic outlines of what it's going to take in order to get the 60 votes to move it through the Senate and eventually move it through the whole process. And so, some of the sticks are going to be, some of the carrots will be the expanded oil and gas production, as well as increased opportunities for nuclear energy. But in general, I'm kind of keeping it at a high level and keeping it a little bit vague because I do want to leave a lot of time for questions and answers. I think that we're on track here. The Senate has got a pretty good process going. Department of Interior is part of that process. The Secretary is working with senators and chair people in the Senate to try to help where we can to make that a reality, and we're going to get there.
Okay, so for the remainder of the 45 minutes that we have, what we'd like to do is return to hearing from you. And so we have from our morning panel several of our senior officials from the department, Sam Hamilton, Bob Abbey, Ann Castle. Of course, the Secretary just rejoined us. Ned Farquhar is here. So we've got a good, strong representation from the department, and we would welcome continued observations, input from you all, and questions. So with that, yes, sir, right here. Identify yourself, please.
Yes, I'm Ray Saroy from a firm, Wright Pierce, an engineering firm up in Maine. We have offices throughout New England. And every day, the engineers that are designing tomorrow's infrastructure that's supposed to last into the second half of this century, are using the historical information that Ann Castle talked about this morning. We're using old data to design new infrastructure, and we really, really need some of those things updated. The 100-year storm, for example, is now a matter of 50-year-old information. And so we really, the engineers today need updated information, and we just like to see that become a part of this new legislation. Thank you.
Let me just say a quick word on that, and then I'll ask Ann to comment. When the Recovery Act passed, and the focus in the department was on getting that money out. We had about $3 billion that came to the Department of Interior. Secretary sat down with all the acting. At that point, most of the bureau heads were acting, and the assistant secretaries were acting, but David Hayes, myself, the other senior team, and he set a list of priorities. And so advancing this agenda for renewable energy and climate change was at the very top of the list. So when it came time for putting Recovery Act dollars to work in the USGS, one of the projects that they came back to the Secretary with, and that was actually funded, was the upgrading of the stream gauges around the country so as to make them immediately, I guess, tie into satellite systems. So rather than have physical folks have to go out physically and record the stream gauges. So just in the short time that this administration has been on the job, from the first day and the first dollar that we had discretion over, we've been trying to advance science, upgrade our technology. Ann, you want to speak to that?
In addition to what Tom has said, one of the things that the secretarial order on climate change is going to do, and it was mentioned this morning, is establish regional climate change response centers in 8 different parts of the country. Those centers are intended to provide the kind of downscaled scientific information that we need to do the future prediction. So USGS will be integral to the scientific work that will be done in those regional science centers to do exactly what we're talking about. These climate change predictions are, not precise, and so we're going to have to work more with ranges than we have historically. We've historically looked at averages. We're going to have to look at ranges and be able to adapt our operations to the best and the worst case situation. But that's what we're trying to do as a result of the secretarial order.
I might also mention on the science front, Dr. Marcia McNutt will be joining the department starting February 5th or November 5th as the head of the USGS and as the chief science advisor to the secretary. Dr. McNutt has been a leading scientist in the country for many, many years, formerly taught at MIT. Most recently, she's been heading up the Monterey Bay Institute and will bring substantial credentials and scientific credibility to what's the most important earth sciences agency, I think, on the planet, USGS. So you're going to see a great marriage of her leadership with a great organization working with Ann and the rest of her team. Yes, sir. Over here with the white card. Yes, sir.
I'm Rob Manus with the Nature Conservancy. With operations in more than 30 countries, we're truly a global organization, and we applaud this administration's already young but impressive track record and determination to be a leader in this realm. One of the things that is apparent to me, and the Conservancy certainly is on board with the need to develop alternative energy strategies that work. One of the things that appears that is lacking in this dialogue, and I'm assuming it's running in the background somewhere, but just to make sure, is the need to link what the interior agencies are doing with the USDA agencies. Comprehensive alternative energy strategy can't operate on 20% of the land resource in the country. It's got to operate on 100% of it. And the nexus between biofuels and wind and solar on private lands has to be made. The comprehensive planning, the truly comprehensive planning for alternative energy is going to have to include both public and private lands, public and private resources. And so I would encourage, as robust as possible, geospatial planning that involves both private and public lands and cooperation between the Interior and USDA agencies. And thank you.
Great. Terrific points, and ones I'm going to ask David Hayes to speak to, very much on our mind and absolutely essential to having this be an effective engagement. David, you want to elaborate?
Sure. I was actually thinking in the previous question we could have mentioned that as well. We are working very closely with our other partners on a number of these issues. For example, the last question dealt with the 100-year flood issues. For example, NOAA has tremendous, through the National Weather Service and related science, it brings tremendous assets to the table there, and we work very closely with NOAA. USGS and NOAA in particular have great working relationships. On the biofuels, Forest Service is a big partner of ours. They're a natural partner of ours. In fact, we have a number of programs where we're very integrated. Our fire program is an example. Also, I mentioned biofuels a little bit this morning, and a final example with the Forest Service is that we're collaborating with them on this analysis of the biological sequestration of carbon in our natural landscapes. We're actually doing that analysis based on something called the land fire system, which is a joint USGS and Forest Service effort to marry satellite technology that we operate through the Landsat program with ground truthing that we, through BLM and the Forest Service, both manage. Let me mention one final area of interagency collaboration that goes beyond your question, but it should be mentioned at some point here. That's on the adaptation side. Just as a number of speakers commented, animals know no boundaries. They certainly can't distinguish between a Department of the Interior sign and a Forest Service sign. And in fact, Nancy Sutley, chair of the Council on Environmental Quality, has pulled together an interagency adaptation group. We are part of the steering committee for that group, but it's to make sure that we are meshed across our agencies. NOAA's a player, we're a player, Forest Service, EPA, et cetera. We all have our angles here, and we're working together.
I think that the essence of how we think the challenges of this phase of the conservation history of the country, let's say Douglas Brinkley writes a book in another 100 years about what we did 100 years after Teddy Roosevelt's remarkable era. I think we would hope that that person would write about the fact that we had the vision and wisdom to look at conservation on the landscape scale and not just look at a particular species or a particular project on a particular piece of land, but we looked at things more broadly. We have examples of how that's worked successfully with the migratory bird strategies. We're going to have to use those kinds of cooperative efforts as we address climate change. And Sam Hamilton and the team at Fish and Wildlife have really been quietly doing work even when it didn't really advance your career in recent memory to be pushing the climate change issue within the Fish and Wildlife Service. That's no longer the case. But the whole backbone of the landscape conservation cooperative system is to look at the land regardless of who owns it and to try and make sense of both the challenges that climate change is presenting to a landscape ecosystem, if you will, as well as man-made activities. I don't know, Sam, you want to add anything to that?
Well, I guess Nature Conservancies play a huge role in having us all think about landscape conservation. When we started building this idea of landscape cooperatives, we really looked at the success we had with migratory birds and the partnership-driven system that we've had so successfully throughout North America, including Mexico and Canada. What was exciting about it, though, is that we could bring all the pieces together, putting the best science that we have on the ground in a way that we could really model populations out into the future. We could work with agencies, private individuals, and both state and federal to achieve big results. I think we have a good model. I think that the role that we played with U.S. Department of Agriculture, in particular, in those joint ventures that we've had, and now broadening those to landscape cooperatives, have been so successful. I'll give one example. The huge program that USDA has called the Wetland Reserve Program in the lower Mississippi Valley. Obviously, they had a scoring system that drove projects a certain direction. As a result of the collaborative efforts through this joint venture management board and now in the future landscape cooperatives, we were able to work with USDA to adjust the scoring factors so that we could achieve mutual benefits out there. So we put tremendous Louisiana black bear habitat on the ground for a threatened species. We were able to do migratory bird projects that were never ever seen before, but at the same time achieving those wetland scores and results for private landowners in the WRP program. So when we do partner with USDA, tremendous results can happen. And so I think there's a big future there marrying up the objectives.
Great. Other questions? Yes. First of all, let me just acknowledge the gentleman I just called on. Many of you in the audience know him, former Governor Tony Knowles from Alaska. We're honored that you're here, Governor, and appreciate your great leadership on so many issues. And you can also answer all the Alaska-directed questions earlier in the day.
There's too many former victims of mine out here.
Yeah. Now's your time. We're going to direct the rest of the questioning to Governor Knowles.
He can answer them all, there'll be no problem.
We know that. Come on.
Thank you. Tony Knowles. I'm now with the National Energy Policy Institute. First, let me say how refreshing and reassuring I think we all feel to see the leadership and the staff of the Department of Interior, people that are so well informed and perform with such great integrity. What a privilege it is to be here with you. Thank you for your leadership for America. Scientists are almost unanimous in their opinion that rather than single species management, that it's very important and almost critical to the health of our ecosystems that we have ecosystem-based management. That we, particularly in times of climate change when there's such stress upon the entire ecosystem, that we look to this to better the health of species that E.O. Wilson tells us by 2050 there may be 30% on the brink of extinction or extinct. Given that, public administrators will tell us that, well, wait a minute, we can't all manage by that way. We depend upon our statutory responsibilities. We have different missions. The question is, can the Department of Interior, with BLM and with the wildlife refuges and with national parks and with MMS, which actually then would have to work with the Department of Commerce, can we have an ecosystem-based management and still maintain the different missions that they're all required to do?
Well, Tony, that's the very question that we saw when we walked in the door on January 21, and we didn't see any mechanism in place to try and reconcile or develop lines of communication and partnership between our various bureaus. David did a very good job of kind of laying out the essence of the climate change strategy. I would ask, Dave, why don't you take a quick shot at that, and then we should let the bureau heads that you ticked off, all of whom are here, just have a quick word, because that's really the heart and soul of the Department of Interior climate change strategy, which we've just rolled out, and further illumination of that is unfolding with Fish and Wildlife Service rolling out a proposed strategic plan. You'll see some similar things to come from BLM and USGS and Park Service, et cetera, going forward. But that, you just hit the nail on the head. That's our challenge, and I think we believe we're putting together an approach that will address that. David, you want to?
Sure. Thanks. Tony, I would say we're trying to attack this on three fronts. One is the traditional large ecosystem front, where we're reviving some of the initiatives of prior administrations that have lagged, frankly. Large ecosystems like the Chesapeake Bay, like the Great Lakes, like the California Bay Delta, like the Everglades, like the Lower Colorado. We are identifying, like Tom's favorite, Louisiana area, as a former LSU Tiger. We are bringing together concentrated efforts again, Pacific Northwest, obviously, salmon, concentrated efforts again to pull together the federal family and our partners on those ecosystem-wide issues and draw attention to them. Secondly, I would say your point about wildlife and not managing for single species. We're going to have more to say about this in the coming weeks, but we want to re-energize the habitat conservation planning process under the Endangered Species Act, which does that, broadens the lens, brings more species in. We're seeing it in a big-time effort now in the California Bay Delta that Grace Napolitano is so familiar with, where instead of just managing for the delta smelt and the salmon species, we're going to look at all those species affected in the delta, come up with what we hope is a solution that will be better for the entire health of the ecosystem and manage around that. The third front of the effort is the landscape conservation cooperative concept that Sam was just talking about, we talked about this morning. And this is perhaps the most exciting of the three. I mean, we've had some experience with the large landscape Chesapeake Bay type issue, and we have to do that. We've had some experience with the habitat conservation planning process. We have to continue doing that. But if we can bring landscape conservation cooperatives to more corners of this country, because we're pulling in partners and it's not just a government sort of initiated effort, then we have the chance to work with all of you and have much more direct impact on ecosystems across a broader landscape.
Let me just say, so we can get to some other questions, because I think David did an excellent job summarizing what we're doing, is that symbolically and substantively, when the President came to the Department of Interior to visit us on our 60th anniversary back in March, he reestablished the prior existing consultation process under the Endangered Species Act. The significance of that was the last administration had decided to back off from the consultation requirements at the level that they had historically been followed, which is kind of at the essence of discerning the impact of projects insofar as their impact on endangered and threatened and endangered species. We're very much about consultation, literally under Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act, but more broadly and importantly, as we roll out renewable energy, these transportation corridors, as we continue the push to develop conventional resources, we've got to have consultation, and that's the essence of our climate change approach, and I think it gets to your question. Back here, yes sir, right here.
Hello, my name is Brian Hirsch. I'm with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, actually also based in Alaska. The laboratory isn't, but I am, as a result of some of the energy challenges that we've discussed today. And I was just curious, given the footprint of federal land with the Interior Department in Alaska, have you folks looked at all at the Federal Energy Management Program, where agencies assist each other in trying to save energy and identify some projects? In particular, some of the Park Service people that I've spoken with up there are real interested maybe in some assistance around putting up solar panels or solar thermal on some of the park facilities and things along those lines.
Right. Well, our new Park Service director actually had a stint as a superintendent at Wrangell St. Elias in Alaska. John, you have anything to speak to on that?
Well, I think we are actually working together on a number of projects with the National Laboratory, not only in Alaska. I know at least several in the lower 48. In Yosemite, they've been working on diesel conversions. We've got a project on Alcatraz that we've been working together on. So I think that there's just a wide range of these kinds of opportunities, both with the laboratory, the private sector as well. We did a great project down in Joshua Tree National Park with Southern California Edison, who partially funded our solar development there, and now produces 60% of the power for the park. And so, I think the range of opportunities are just wide open for those kinds of partnerships.
Great. Over here, questions? Yes, ma'am, right here.
Hi, Rebecca Water, American Rivers. Again, I want to thank everybody for the great leadership that we've heard today. My question or comment has to do with natural infrastructure, green infrastructure. The water infrastructure in this country is falling apart. We have at least $500 billion just in our drinking and waste and stormwater systems of repairs to do. If you add on to that dams and levees to protect from floods and droughts, that's maybe $3 trillion of traditional engineering solutions. So my question is for Department of Interior and the great work that you can do in leading and demonstrating new approaches to solving some of the water-related problems that are going to be exacerbated by climate change. How can you help us move from the status quo of strictly built solutions from the 19th and 20th century into incorporating these green 21st century natural infrastructure solutions?
Okay, Mike Connor thinks he's off the hook because he's sitting back a few rows, but he's our head of the Bureau of Reclamation. Mike, you want to say a few words about that point, and then Ann?
Well, I think there's obviously a lot we can do with the green infrastructure to address a lot of these water supply problems. The more we use natural cleansing processes in our streams and rivers, the less we have to do cleanup systems. So as part of our restoration activities at the Bureau of Reclamation, incorporating those type of restoration activities, improving wetlands, et cetera, is part of what we obviously want to do, is we incorporate green infrastructure type systems. I think Overall, you know, I don't know if this is viewed as the green infrastructure category, but certainly from my perspective, water conservation and efficiency measures and system optimization measures are a key aspect of what we're going to do. And Assistant Secretary and Castle talked about this. This is really going to be a focal point where we address aggressively, I think, the impacts of climate change as we all seek to have better modeling and understand the implications better. We know right now that there's a lot we can do to address the water supply needs that exist across the landscape other than just building new storage or producing more water. So that's obviously part of the green infrastructure agenda from our perspective. Those are a couple examples.
Great. Ann, you want to add to that?
Thank you. Mike is a wonderful Commissioner of Reclamation and has really hit the high points. But I also think that we need to think more broadly, think outside the box more than we have before within the Bureau of Reclamation about using natural systems, using aquifer storage as opposed to construction of new facilities, using natural flood control plains instead of constructing additional flood control facilities. So those are the kinds of things we don't know a whole lot about. We haven't seen their widespread use, but we need to get smart about them and we need to start using them as well. So thanks for your question.
I'm going to take a question here from our online viewers. Here's a question. How do you plan to train employees for the green jobs of the future? How do you plan to train employees for the green jobs of the future? Bob Abbey, you've got many thousands of employees. And then I'm going to ask John Jarvis. So.
Well, I think that's an excellent question. First and foremost, you go out and recruit the ones with the knowledge already. And then you steal them from other sources of industry and other places. But
other bureaus at DOI, maybe?
From any place. No, it is going to take a concerted effort to go out and attract people, first and foremost, to public service. The industry is doing a great job of bringing in such talent from universities, from other sources to help them plan for their infrastructure, plan for their projects. Public service agencies like the Bureau of Land Management need to do the same thing. We have a lot that we can offer these employees. We need to create a work environment where they feel valued, where they have an opportunity to advance, and by doing all that, I think we'll be successful.
I might just add, Bob, with his 30 years of experience at BLM and his decision to rejoin the department and work with the Secretary and with us, is very committed and has spoken very eloquently within his organization at the BLM of really helping that culture at the BLM look at a broader portfolio perhaps than what it had been previously charged with doing. And I think the passage of the legislation for the National Conservation Landscape System or Landscape Conservation System, I think the role that BLM is going to be playing now with renewable energy, you're going to see, I think, a great history and tradition of land managers focused on multiple use now have additional very important policy responsibilities, and I think Bob's up to that challenge. John?
Yeah, just to add a few comments to that. You know, that it's cool to be green now, and we're seeing a complete change in the contractors that we're working with that come to us with green proposals, our concessioners that provide visitor facilities and operations are coming to us with extraordinary ideas. They're beginning to market their facilities based on their greenness to appeal to tourists as well. So I think there's this sort of groundswell going on out there right now among a wide range of employers to embrace new technologies related to sustainability. In the facilities field, and you know, the National Park Service has a huge inventory of facilities. Our facilities staff are really beginning to, on their own, have sort of pioneers in using biodiesels and all kinds of biodegradable products and switching out their fleets. And in part, it's just a matter of giving them the authority and support to move forward, and then take those ones that really leap out in front and use them as mentors to get them out and to show the others how to do it. And then we're partnering with a variety of youth organizations, such as the Student Conservation Association, who are bringing young people into our parks specifically for green jobs training.
Right, thanks. Other questions? Yes, ma'am, right here.
Thank you. Mira Kohler with Alaska Village Electric Co-op again. I really do appreciate you folks all being here because you're hearing from the heartland what really is going on in our communities. I have to tell you that as we're building wind projects to serve our small villages, one of our more significant obstacles is the federal government, and specifically Fish and Wildlife Service, Tom. What we find is that there's not a lot of data about migratory birds in terms of exactly where they are and how many and so forth, and so we're used as a testing ground to develop information. And when you have a small community where you only sell 1.25 million kilowatt hours a year, a surcharge of $60,000 or $70,000 to do wildlife surveys during the season adds 5 cents a kilowatt hour. And so my exhortation is to the federal agencies to be very sensitive to the local issues and try and put people first.
Okay, great. We'll note that, and Sam and his folks will follow up. If you haven't asked a question, why don't you raise your hand if you haven't had a chance to ask a question yet, and that way, yes, sir, in the back. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
John Flicker from the National Audubon Society. Sam told a wonderful story this morning of the beginning of the National Wildlife Refuge System with a very small act when Teddy Roosevelt declared a small mangrove island as a refuge. You know, the rest of the story, Sam, is when Teddy Roosevelt wanted to hire Paul Craigle as the first employee for the refuge system, didn't have any money, so Audubon put up the money to fund your first staff person, and we've been fighting for your funding ever since, and still do. But, one of the keystone species now that's affected by energy development in the Intermountain West is the sage grouse. It's become quite controversial out there, but Governor Freudenthal has been leading a really science-driven effort to declare core habitat in Wyoming as a strategy for addressing both renewable and fossil fuel energy development. And I was just wondering if this is a strategy that the Interior Department could adopt as well and use more broadly throughout the Intermountain West, and how you react to that.
Well, thank you, first of all, for hiring the first employee or helping pay for the first employee, because that is a long chain now that leads us to Sam Hamilton. I'm going to ask Steve Black to speak to that, because I think I like to quote Bob Abbey. He doesn't even know that I quote him, but he uses the term smart from the start with it when it comes to renewable energy. And I was glad he didn't use it in his remarks today, so that I could steal it from him and claim credit for it myself. But I think the key is to look at these issues, because from the outset, in terms of location, whether it's transmission lines or where you're going to site wind or where you're going to site solar, because location, location, location. With conventional resources, you have less latitude as to where to go after those, because they are where they are in the ground. Now with directional drilling, you've got a little more flexibility than you've had in the past. But you obviously have to go to wind where there's wind and go to sun where there's sun, but there are some broad ranges where that takes place. So if you're smart from the start, and if you look at these values and issues up front with some good comprehensive planning, then I think you can get to better outcomes. Because if the project is bad in its inception, you really can't put lipstick on it and make it look much better at the end of the day. But Steve's been very engaged in this with Western governors, with the state of California. Why don't you speak to that, Steve?
Thank you, Tom. Is this on? There we go. Thank you. Sam is nervous about what I'm about to say. I can tell. The short answer to the question is yes. We are working very closely with Michael Bean, who is a counselor to the Assistant Secretary, who many of you know. And within the Secretary's Renewable Energy Task Force, Renewable Energy and Climate Change Task Force that David alluded to earlier, we have established a working group that is specifically tasked with looking at these wildlife and energy issues, the potential conflicts between energy development and wildlife, and sage grouse is right at the top of the list. And Michael Bean and Sam Hamilton and others within the Fish and Wildlife Service have worked very closely with the state of Wyoming. We're very directly involved with Governor Freudenthal and his efforts in the sage grouse core areas. Many of you in this room have been working very hard to site wind development, whether it's on the generation side or the transmission side in Wyoming, and are familiar with the struggles. But Tom's right, we can only succeed if we do this right.
So we are taking a very thoughtful and measured approach in Wyoming. Wyoming has huge wind potential, but in order to get it out of the state, we need to build transmission, and a lot of the potential wind sites and transmission sites are in sage-grouse core areas or near them. So we're not out of the woods yet. This is going to be a long road, but it's a very active partnership, and if any of you wants to follow up, I encourage you to reach out to Sam or Michael Bean on that.
Thank you. Other questions? If you haven't had a chance to ask a question, I'll call on you now. Right here, sir.
Yes, Doug Johnson, Ocean Renewable Power Company. We're currently developing tidal energy projects in Alaska and in Maine. And one of the things that we're finding challenges is with interagency coordination and working through the permitting process. And one of the things I would really encourage is I've heard a lot of great language today around how agencies can work together. One of the things we're finding is that we're currently mandated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to follow a process, and we're working with them to help streamline that process to what we're now calling a pilot process for hydrokinetic development in tidal areas. And what we'd like to try to do is get agencies working in coordination around that process. So we're all sort of singing off the same sheet of music. It is going to take, to make renewables real, it's going to take a tremendous cooperative effort. I know we can do it, but it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of coordination, and I like that, you know, right from the start is very important, and I hope we can make that happen.
Great, thank you. Yes, sir, right back here.
I've ever seen, and come up to speed so quickly.
In fact, we have a microphone for you, but that was constant.
Let me start over again.
Mr.
Jarvis, I'd like to say I've worked for the Sierra Club for 22 years, and I thought it was always cool to be green. But I want to thank the Secretary and the administration for putting together such a responsive and a really quickly moving team here at Interior. It's really great. It's the most responsive Interior Department I've ever seen, and it is really couldn't happen at a more important moment in trying to accomplish these things. One of the things I wanted to pitch today is the idea of not separating out or thinking separately. I know people are trying to weave them together more, the ideas of mitigation and adaptation, because in doing the right siting for projects, getting it smart from the start, for example, I think we have to think about where on the landscape our conservation opportunities are going to be. It helps us to understand where we're going to go, but it also helps us to understand where we really ought not go. There's a lot of uncertainty in this area. We all know that. We're going to have to make some judgments, though, because we can't afford not to build the renewables that we have to build. There's a need for technological innovation that's been mentioned earlier today, but there's also a need for policy innovation. Try some new things and go in some different directions. The scale of the development was mentioned earlier today, that large-scale solar is an absolute use on the landscape. Gotcha. And I do think that if we look at it in terms of conservation opportunities, though, and we link the siting of projects to the large-scale conservation opportunities, we can really find some forward-looking things to do. It doesn't always have to be about the large-scale impact on the land, because we have to think more broadly about where things will go.
Great. Appreciate that. At this point, what I think I'm going to do is ask our panel members to offer some closing comments. I'll have a few words, and then review the details for our 4 o'clock reception. So David, whether you want to respond to that last point or anything else, welcome your closing remarks.
I think we've covered a lot of territory today. I think I just want to close by, first of all, thanking all of you for coming, and encouraging all of you to continue to interact with us. I'm looking at some people around the room that we hear from a lot, and we appreciate that. We'd like to hear from the rest of you as well. And what we wanted to do today was give you a sense of the breadth of the initiatives we have going in these areas of renewable energy / climate change / adaptation, / conservation. And I do feel, as some of you have commented, that this is such an important time in our country. If we can get this right, we can do the trifecta here. You know, we can really change our energy economy away from a fossil fuel-based economy. We can really confront and adapt with science to climate change and its impact on our resources, while thirdly, we are being true to the principles of conservation that are so important to all of us. And I will tell you, it's tough sledding, but we've got a great team, and we're really, we feel we're on the right path, but we know we can't do it without you. And in fact, the conflicts that we're seeing and the challenges to work through them are some of the hardest I've ever encountered in my 30 years in this field. But I have some confidence that because of the team we have, the support we have on the Hill, and thank you, Chairwoman Napolitano, for sitting through this entire program. That speaks volumes, doesn't it? Thank you. And the support of so many organizations and groups like you, and thanks to all the tribal members who are here today, whose voices we particularly appreciate hearing. I think with this combination we can actually do it, but we're going to need your help, and we'll look forward to it.
Well, again, let me thank all of you for this. Your participation, particularly the First Americans who are here with us today. We're really in this together. You know, I've had great hopes throughout my career that we would operate someday at the landscape scale, at the ecosystem scale. And, you know, so much of the news around climate change is negative. But I think actually the silver lining here is that finally we are somewhat forced to, but we are beginning to really, truly operate at the landscape, at the ecosystem scale, that all of the entities, all of the, everyone is in this together, private lands, the private sector, and all the public lands as well, to seek a solution. A few weeks ago, Ken Burns had his special on America's Best Idea, the national parks. And he stopped that story in 1980, essentially giving us a historical perspective on the national parks. And that idea, as many of you know, has been adopted and adapted around the world. So there are literally hundreds of systems, hundreds of countries that have national park systems of a variety of sorts. And they have always looked to this country to provide leadership in how protected areas would retain their long-term ecological sustainability, survivability, as well as their long-term association with people, particularly indigenous people. So again, we are charting that future right here in this room and within this department and with all of our partners about the future of these systems and the future of national parks and protected areas around the world.
Thanks, John. Christopher?
Well, thanks again for all your coming. And you've had a great opportunity to hear from a large part of the Secretary's team and Department of Interior, but it's more important for us to hear directly from you. We hear each other all the time in all these numerous staff meetings we have all day long. So it's very, very helpful for us to hear from you who are out there on the front lines. I would just reiterate that you know, people say, why do we need an energy and climate change bill? You know, the Department of Interior is doing all of these things, and other agencies are involved in it. If we want to ensure that these gains that the Obama administration has made over the last several months, if we want to ensure that they're going to stick around longer than the life of the administration, we really need to have comprehensive energy and climate change legislation. And I know many of you here are veterans of previous environmental fights and here in Washington, and you know how important it is for Congress to hear directly from, as does the Congresswoman, from their people in their districts and in their states. You're the ones who are going to make it happen, and together I think we can put together a really great bill.
Thanks, Christopher. Let me just acknowledge, as the other speakers have, your participation here today. And I look around the room, and I know many of you and a number of you have met or seen for the first time. Very thoughtful questions. We see representatives of some of the most important sportsman groups in the country. We see, of course, our friends from the tribal communities. We see friends from the NGO community, key business leaders and trade associations involved in energy in renewable energy in particular. It's a great group. Collectively, you represent hundreds of thousands, if not millions of individuals who kind of speak through you and look to you and your organizations for information. And so one of the things we wanted to do today was to convey to you, as Jim Messina did, just how, and the Secretary, how deadly serious this problem and challenge is, how committed this administration is to moving this country forward. Now, I think you've seen over the last number of months in the healthcare area how focused and single-minded this administration has been on that epic issue, which has, I think, eluded generation after generation of leadership. And now it looks like we're at a moment in time when it may all come together. You heard that the same kind of commitment is going to come from the White House on this front. And we have to do it because of the consequences of climate change. We have to do it because we need the evolution in our economy. We need to do it because we need the national security that will come with energy independence. It's the right thing to do on so many fronts. And the Secretary of Interior, Ken Salazar, is one of the most focused and determined people that any of us have ever known. And if you follow his track record in Colorado, as I have since we've been friends for 28 years, you know that when he sets his mind to do something, it's hard to keep him from being successful. If you look at what he did with Great Outdoors Colorado, if you look at what he did as a head of the Department of Natural Resources, as Attorney General, and then in the U.S. Senate in his 4 years there, he is deeply involved and committed to this agenda. This president is deeply involved and committed to this agenda. When we came into this department on January 21st, David and a handful of us ahead of the Senate confirmees, we found a department that had really not been moving forward at all on this agenda. There'd really been very little, if any, real work done on climate change, very little, if any, real work done on renewable energy. And in just a little over 9 months, I think you've seen the team that Secretary Salazar has assembled. You've seen our determination and our focus. You've seen tangible, specific steps we're taking to make these projects a reality. But let me just speak to a couple of points. We are going to be a science-based operation. You heard that time and again. We're going to be transparent. We're going to be engaged in processes that let the public know what we're about, and we want to hear from you as we have today. And we're going to look for public-private cooperative opportunities. We're going to look for engagement from the private sector and the NGOs. So those are some of the themes that are part of this administration and part of Secretary Salazar's commitment. Your presence here today helps us realize that. You're going to hear from us all by email. You're going to get the materials that were referenced here today by email. We've decided to move up the reception to 3 o'clock. So you can, if you've got the opportunity or the availability on your schedule, come over to the department at 18th and C, come up to the 6th floor, and the reception will take place then, and you can buttonhole your favorite person that you didn't get to ask a question of, or each other as the day goes. Congresswoman, when's the next session? Very good. We'll try and answer that at 3 o'clock, Congresswoman. Yeah, thank you for the question. Thank you all. I'd like to give you all a round of applause and all the participants.